SLT Mobitel Home Broadband සමගින් non-stop ගමනකට data බෝවන්. SLT Mobitel Home Broadband සමගින් non-stop ගමනකට data බෝවන්.
प्याज चोटी पैक रुपयाल 37ක වාසියක් දැන් රුපියල් 145යි.
Tonight, holistic security. National security isn't limited to military protection, but food security and economic security a priority for Sri Lanka, says President Ranil Wickremesinghe. The price to pay. Provincial council polls, if held, will carry a heavy burden on the country, says Cabinet spokesperson Bandula Gunawardana. Status quo. Clarification issued that Sri Lanka is not downgraded to a low-income country. Middle-income status will be maintained. Quick solutions. Sri Lanka needs immediate debt relief to avoid poverty and purposes, and proposes debt restructuring framework focusing on key debt sustainability analysis, among other key areas. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Tuesday, the 11th of October 2022.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening, you're joining the Primetime English News Bulletin of AdaDerana 24 and I'm Andrew Bernard. Now, President Ranil Wickremesinghe says the entire state sector will be deployed to implement a national program to ensure food security and nutrition. Speaking at a progress review, President Ranil Wickremesinghe said that economic and food security remains a priority in terms of national security. The progress review meeting of the national programs to ensure food security and nutrition was held at the Presidential Secretariat this morning under the patronage of President Ranil Wickremesinghe. The meeting focused on issues faced by farmers when cultivating, as well as ways to identify crops that can be cultivated at rural level. Further, President Wickremesinghe advised officials to submit a report on the areas in the country that are affected by food shortage and instructed to establish community kitchens and food banks covering each district based on information received.
ආහාර සුරක්ෂිතභාවය ආරක්ෂා කරන්න. ලෝකේ තියෙන ආර්ථික ප්‍රශ්න නිසා 2023 අවසන් වෙනකන් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. යුක්‍රේන යුද්ධේ හෙට ඉවර වුණත් ඒක එක සැරේ විසඳෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඉන්දියාව දැන් පියවර ගන්නවා තමන්ගේ ආහාර ආරක්ෂා කරන. සමහර රටවල් අපනයනය කරන්න දෙන්නෙත් නැහැ. ඒකෙන් තවත් ප්‍රශ්නයක් එනවා. ඒ නිසා අපිට දැන් තියෙන්නේ අපේ ආහාර වැඩසටහන අරගෙන සුරක්ෂිතභාවය ඇති කරන්න. ඒ සඳහා අපි නීතියකුත් සම්මත කරනවා. විශේෂයෙන්ම කෘෂිකර්මය නවීකරණ වැඩසටහනක් ගෙනද. ඉතින් මෙතන තියෙන්නේ මූලික යන්ත්‍ර විතරයි. අපි කොහොම හරි මේ රටට ඉන්ධන ගෙනත් දෙන්න ඕනේ, ආහාර තියෙන්න ඕනේ. මේ දෙකට කැප් වෙලා වැඩ කරන්න. රටේ ආරක්ෂාව කියන්නේ යුද්ධ විතරක් නෙමෙයි. ආර්ථික ආරක්ෂාවයි ආහාර ආරක්ෂාව තියෙන්න ඕනේ. ඒ නිසා මේ සියල්ලම යොදවගෙන අපි කොහොම හරි දැන් මේක වැඩ කටයුතු ආරම්භ කරමු. අපේ අද තියෙනවා උවමනාවටත් වඩා රාජ්‍ය සේවකයෝ. ඉතින් ඇයි අපිට බැරි මේ වැඩ කටයුතු කරන්න? සම්පූර්ණ රාජ්‍ය සේවය යොදවමු. අපි හැම එකක්ම අරගෙන අපි දැනගන්න ඕනේ අපේ වැඩසටහන් කොහොමද කියලා. මම බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන සුමාන 3කින් පස්සේ ඒ දත්ත සතියෙන් සතිය කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලයට ලැබෙයි කියලා. බහැලා වැඩ කටයුතු කරමු. ප්‍රශ්න එනකොට විසඳු. බහැ කියන්නේ එච්චරයි.
Now, the United Nations Development Programme says 54 developing economies, including Sri Lanka, needs immediate debt relief to avoid extreme poverty and give these nations a chance to dealing with climate change. The UNDP proposes a common framework on debt restructuring, focusing on key areas that include debt sustainability analysis, official creditor coordination, and private creditor participation, and the use of state contingent debt clauses that target future economic and fiscal resilience. Now, the UN agency also suggests that major official creditors, most notably China and the Paris Club, be willing to work together. In a UNDP publication titled Avoiding Too Little Too Late on international debt relief, it is highlighted that the market conditions are shifting rapidly as synchronized fiscal and monetary contraction and low growth are fueling volatility around the globe. According to the UNDP paper, 54 developing economies, including Sri Lanka, that account for over half of the world's poorest people, need urgent debt relief as a result of cascading global crises. The report warns if countries do not have access to effective debt restructuring, poverty will rise and desperately needed investments in climate adaptation and mitigation will not happen, particularly since countries affected are among the most climate vulnerable in the world. With that being the case, the paper proposes common framework on debt restructuring, focusing on key areas that include debt sustainability analysis, official creditor coordination, private creditor participation, and the use of state contingent debt clauses targeting future economic and fiscal resilience. Further, the United Nations Development Programme proposes that the common framework shifts focus on comprehensive restructuring that will allow countries a faster return to growth, fiscal markets, and development progress. The UNDP suggests that the major official creditors, most notably China and the Paris Club of Creditors, must be willing to work together. They also say that both debtors and creditors must commit to full transparency on the amount of outstanding loans and terms, and debtors should seek restructuring earlier or preemptively. Further, they suggest expanding the eligibility of the common framework to cover all heavily indebted countries and suspend debt service payments while the debtor country is undergoing debt treatment in good faith and maintain the IMF's lending into arrears policy. They also call to ensure that debt sustainability analysis are grounded in realistic assumptions about countries' debt dynamics, including country-specific macroeconomic modeling parameters, spending needs and revenue mobilization capacity, and considering vulnerability and exposure to economic shocks, including from climate change. They also urge to pay careful consideration to policy conditionalities such as conditions for financial support and debt for development deals. Now, Japan and Sri Lanka signed a memorandum of cooperation on the joint crediting mechanism for low-carbon growth partnership, a mechanism that is developed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions jointly with developing countries. According to the Presidential Secretariat, projects in energy, industry, transport, waste, forestry and agriculture sectors for reducing greenhouse gas emissions are expected to be implemented. Further implementation of JCM is expected to support Sri Lanka in achieving greenhouse gas emission reduction targets under the Paris Agreement. Japan and Sri Lanka signed a memorandum of cooperation on the joint crediting mechanism for low-carbon growth partnership at the Presidential Secretariat yesterday. After its withdrawal from the second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol, Japan introduced the joint crediting mechanism in 2013 to contribute to global effort of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The mechanism has been developed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions jointly with developing countries, and currently Japan is implementing projects under the JCM mechanism in 17 countries including Saudi Arabia, Mexico, Chile, Myanmar, Thailand and Philippines. Through the implementation of the proposed projects under this mechanism, benefits such as introducing new technologies, technical expertise, capacity building, generation of green jobs, and new infrastructure development can be achieved. The Japanese government and its private sector will provide technical assistance and part of the capital investment to implement this mechanism in developing countries. Under this mechanism, projects in energy, industry, transport, waste, forestry, and agriculture sectors for reducing greenhouse gas emissions are expected to be implemented. In Sri Lanka, the implementation of the joint crediting mechanism will support achieving greenhouse gas emission reduction targets under the Paris Agreement and contribute to the global efforts of reaching the global temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. Approval from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Attorney General's Department has been obtained for the implementation of the joint carbon crediting mechanism between Japan and Sri Lanka. Cabinet approval was granted in September this year for the implementation of the JCM mechanism. When implementing this mechanism in Sri Lanka, a joint committee co-chaired by the governments of Japan and Sri Lanka and representatives of both countries will be established to approve the projects. Now, Sri Lanka's Cabinet of Ministers gave approval to formally request the World Bank to place the island on a lower credit classification to access cheaper loans. Minister Bandula Gunawardena said Sri Lanka's request to a GAP country follows the defaulting on foreign loans in April 2022. Sri Lanka no longer qualifies for International Bank for reconstruction and development loans due to a downgrade of the country's credit rating. Therefore, the Cabinet approved a proposal yesterday to request the World Bank to grant the country eligibility to obtain loans offered by the International Development Association. This is with the aim of obtaining concessionary funding from the International Development Association, which is the arm of the World Bank that helps the world's vulnerable countries. This facility is called GAP. 12 countries, including Indonesia, have availed themselves of this facility when they were facing economic downturn similar to Sri Lanka. The government is pursuing a reverse graduation policy for a limited time. Meanwhile, issuing a statement, the President's office clarified that Sri Lanka will remain a middle-income country, although the country has formally requested the World Bank to be placed on the lower credit classification to access the cheaper loans. The Cabinet spokesperson, Dr. Bandula Gunawardena, says holding provincial council elections given Sri Lanka's current situation will only exert a tremendous financial burden on the people. Addressing the weekly media cabinet briefing, Dr. Bandula Gunawardena said it would be unwise to hold the provincial council elections at this juncture as the country is unable to bear its burden.
මේ පළාත් පාලන නියෝජිතයන්ගේ සංඛ්‍යාව 8000කට ආසන්න වෙලා තිබෙනවා. මේ වියදම ජනතාවට දරා ගන්න බැරි තරම් විශාල වැයබරක් බවට පත්වෙන තත්ත්වය වෙනස් කරන්න මූලික යෝජනාවක් ලෙස එතුමා ඉදිරිපත් කරලා තිබෙනවා. මහජන නියෝජිතයන්ගේ සංඛ්‍යාව 4000කට අඩු කරලා පළාත් පාලන ආයතනයේ පිහිටවීමේදී දැනට සභාපතිවරයාට තනි බලයක් හිමි වේ. ඒ තනි බලයේ හිමි වෙන තත්ත්වය වෙනස් කරන්න කමිටුවක් මගින් පළාත් පාලනය පිළිබඳ තීන්දුව తీරන ගැනීමට නීති වෙනස් කිරීම සඳහා වෙන යෝජනාවක් එතුමා තේරීම්කාරක සභාවකට ඉදිරිපත් කළා. එයින් අනුමැතිය ලබාගත නොහැකි වුණොත් එතුමා සඳහන් කරලා තියෙනවා ජනමත විචාරණයකට ගිහිල්ලා ජනතා කැමැත්ත විමසන්නත් බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා.
Now, the Cabinet of Ministers gave the green light yesterday to raise the compensation received by the families of missing persons to 200,000 rupees from 100,000 rupees at present. The Cabinet also waived the need to have certificates issued by the Registrar General to the families of the missing persons when collecting the compensation. Now, here's a look at other key decisions made by the Cabinet of Ministers at this week's meeting. The Cabinet of Ministers also approved a proposal presented by Minister of Ports, Shipping and Aviation to take necessary steps for the procurement of a tug vessel as per international competitive bidding process. Although there are 7 tugboats currently operating at the port of Colombo, it has been identified that one more vessel of 80-ton capacity should be procured to meet requirements of future operations. Meanwhile, with the contract period of the current automated crew scheduling and resource management system of the Sri Lankan Airlines due to expire on the 31st of this month, the Cabinet gave the green light to award the relevant procurement to CAE Flight Services USA for a period of 5 years. In addition, the Cabinet approved the proposal presented by the Minister of Transport and Highways to award the contract package regarding the reconstruction of the Surya Kanda Rakwana Deniyaya Madampe Road in Galle, which is under the Cabinet authority to KDA Veerasinghe and Private Limited. And we'll be back with more news. Stay with us.
අයිනෝ පුතා හැබැයි යා ගෙදර නිදියන්නෙම අමෝතු තැනක.
කාලගුණය කොහොමුණත් රයිනෝ නං වාලට සේෆ් තමයි මුළු ගෙදරම. Rhino Cement Roofing Sheets. Then you know Rhino. I know.
Big 3.
Uber Eats මගින් ඉදිරිපත් කරන ආදරයෙන් අවශ්‍යතා ඇතියට අත්‍යවශ්‍ය භාණ්ඩ පරිත්‍යාග කිරීමට වේදිකාවක්.
Welcome back. Now, the Sri Lankan delegation currently in Washington, D.C. to attend the annual meetings of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund met the IMF's first Deputy Managing Director, Geeta Gopinath. State Minister of Finance Shayan Semasinghe tweeted that the discussion focused on economic reforms adopted to resolve challenges the country is experiencing and the way forward with the assistance of the IMF. The 2022 annual meetings of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank Group are important for Sri Lanka in terms of the debt restructuring process to obtain financial assistance from the IMF. An 8-member Sri Lankan delegation comprising State Minister of Finance Shayan Semasinghe, Treasury Secretary Mahinda Siriwardana and Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe are representing Sri Lanka at the annual meetings. Now, the YouTube channel of AdaDerana marked yet another milestone, gaining over 4 million subscribers by last night, making AdaDerana the only YouTube channel owned by any media network in Sri Lanka to achieve such a height. AdaDerana Sri Lanka's premium entertainment channel marked yet another milestone yesterday, with the YouTube channel becoming the first and only YouTube channel owned by a media network in Sri Lanka to have a subscriber base of over 4 million. The AdaDerana YouTube channel was launched in January 2012 with the intention of broad-basing viewership and making some of the most popular and sought-after content available for viewers through another platform. AdaDerana launched broadcasting in the year 2005, and since then the television brand has reached every nook and corner of the island, winning the hearts of the Sri Lankan television audiences. Today, the AdaDerana YouTube channel reflects the admiration and loyalty of the viewership over the years. In 2019, the AdaDerana YouTube channel subscriber base exceeded 1 million. Then in 2020, 2 million. In 2021, 3 million, and now a new height of 4 million. Content ranging from award-winning teledramas to reality programs, children's programs, current affairs programs, and education programs have all gained the appreciation and popularity of the masses. A more notable feat of the AdaDerana YouTube channel is that there are over 3,400 million views on over 20,600 videos published. Now, Laughs Gas also slashed the prices of its LP gas cylinders earlier today. However, in other news, the Colombo High Court trial at bar has accepted that charges cannot be maintained under the Public Properties Act against former governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Arjun Mahendran, Aloysius of the Perpetual Treasuries, and other defendants over the case against them. Arjun Mahendran, Aloysius and others are accused in the case of the Treasury bond auction of 27 February 2015. The order was issued by a two-thirds majority of the three-member High Court bench, which consisted of Justices Sanjeeva Mayorias, Damit Totavatta and Namal Balele. Now, Laughs Gas also announced today a reduction of its prices in its LP gas cylinders. Accordingly, the price of a 12.5 kilogram cylinder of LP gas has been reduced by 500 rupees. With the revision, the new price of a 12.5 kilogram gas cylinder is now standing at 5,300 rupees. Meanwhile, the price of a 5 kilogram cylinder has been reduced by 200 rupees to 2,120 rupees. Welcome back. In your business news, now the market commenced the trading week today on a negative note, with the main index plunging below 9,000 level. The SPI drop was triggered by margin calls and extended panic selling. Retail favorites Expo Lanka and LIOC majority pulled down the index, whereas collection was witnessed on selected banking sector counters as investors continued to collect beaten down shares. In response, the main index witnessed a steep fall since the beginning of the session and continued to drag down and close the day at 8,744, losing 305 points. Despite a loss, turnover improved by 46% and was recorded at 3 billion during the day. As a result, capital goods sector dominated the market turnover with a contribution of 35%, followed by the transportation sector. Now, oil slid more than 2% today, extending losses of nearly 2% in the previous session, as recession fears and a flare-up in COVID-19 cases in China raised concern over global demand. Losses were limited, however, by a tight market and last week's decision by the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Companies and the allies, including Russia, to lower their output targets by 2 million barrels per day. Brent crude fell by as much as 1.7% and was down by $1.63 and $94.56 a barrel. Meanwhile, West Texas Intermediate crude dropped by as much as 2% and was last at $89.31, down $1.82. Oil has dropped sharply on economic fears after surging early in 2022, when Brent came close to its record high of $147 as Russia's invasion of Ukraine added to supply concerns. The market was also hit by fears of a further hit to demand in China as authorities have stepped up coronavirus testing in Shanghai and other large cities as COVID-19 infections rise again. Oil also came under pressure from a strong dollar, which hit multi-year highs on worries about increases to the interest rates and escalation of the Ukraine war. Now, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka has appointed R.A.M. Dowlagala as the new Deputy Governor of the Central Bank. Now, the Nigerian president announces that the death toll from a boat accident in Nigeria's southeastern state of Anambra has risen to 76. The overloaded boat, which was reportedly carrying 95 people, capsized on Friday while they attempted to flee dangerously high flood waters that have inundated swathes in southern Nigeria. On Saturday, officials reported that at least 10 people had died and 60 were missing. In a statement posted on Twitter on Sunday, Nigeria's president, however, said that emergency authorities had confirmed a higher death toll of 76. Authorities are working to rescue or recover any missing passengers. Over 300 people in Nigeria have died, and 100,000 people have been displaced in recent flooding, which emergency services describe as the worst flooding since 2012. Now, the powerful Hurricane Juliet dissipated yesterday, leaving a trail of destruction through Central America and Mexico as its remnants continued to drench the region after killing at least 26 people. Juliet, the fifth hurricane of this year's Atlantic season, made landfall as a Category 1 storm early Sunday in Intagua with maximum sustained winds of 140 km per hour. The storm survived the passage over the country's mountainous terrain and re-emerged along the Pacific coast, drenching Honduras, El Salvador and Guatemala as it moved north. By dayfall yesterday, the hurricane was downgraded to a tropical depression as it moved along the coast of El Salvador, but not after bringing life-threatening flooding and the risk of landslides to the region. However, yesterday, Storm Julia moved inland over Guatemala and its wind speed was down to 50 km per hour. Meanwhile, the U.S. National Hurricane Center added that floods and mudslides were possible across Central America and the southern Mexico throughout today, with the storm expected to bring as much as 15 inches of rain in several areas. And that's all the news we have for you this evening. Join us again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.